Hi everybody. If you've seen my video on why I don't like live-action Disney movies, you'll notice I mentioned one of my favorite underrated Disney movies, Atlantis: The Lost Empire. I figured I'd say why I enjoy it and why I think it's unique among most other Disney Renaissance films. Just as a disclaimer, this is my opinion. Some people may not like it for some reasons, and that's fine. But these are the reasons why I think it stands out in my memory as an epic film that dared to be different. Anyway, here we go. For the first reason, I enjoy it as to that it isn't another Disney musical. While I do enjoy Disney musicals, it isn't always my favorite way to get information across to the main viewer. Especially in cases like Moana, where the music just wasn't very memorable or even that good, in my opinion. Too many songs just drag out the runtime and mess with the pacing of the movie if they're done wrong. The main reason for Atlantis not having songs is because Disney had already done The Hunchback of Notre Dame just a couple of years ago, and they figured that too many musicals would feel too repetitive to the viewers. You can also see this case in movies like Rescuers Down Under that didn't have any songs. But that's another story. As such, the story of Atlantis just wasn't conducive to being made into a musical. It just wouldn't work well as anything else other than an epic adventure story, and making it a musical would have been just soundtrack-selling filler. The crew even joked around about having t-shirts made that said, "Less songs, more explosions." How funny is that? They wore them on the set while they were making the movie. That's some sense of humor there. Also, for any Star Trek fans watching, this one's for you. Atlantis not only has the legendary late Leonard Nimoy directing King Kashyyykim, the leader of Atlantis, R.I.P., rest in peace, Mr. Spock, but the Atlantean language was invented by Mark Okrand, the creator of the Klingon and Vulcan languages from Star Trek. Also, if you look up the language, you'll find a whole alphabet, complete with K, Ch, and Th, very much like Mesoamerican writing. It's written in Bostrofeden, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, style, a unique method of writing that was also inspired by Mesoamerican codices. You read in a zigzag pattern, which in the movie is meant to imitate the flow of water. It makes sense that in a movie about a sunken city, their language would be water-based. Also, on the topic of real-life sources of inspiration, the heart of Atlantis, being this giant sentient crystal that gives life energy, is inspired by the writings of a famous clairvoyant named Edgar Cayce, whose books included topics about such as a mother crystal that provides life and longevity. Very much the same way the heart of Atlantis provides the Atlanteans with lifespans of well over several centuries, as they mentioned in the movie. The crew of Atlantis, the movie, not the fictional crew, even traveled 800 feet underground into the Carlsbad Caverns for inspiration for the underground scenes in the movie. They used real-life caverns in Carlsbad, New Mexico to get a decent idea of the base model of the tunnels and the scenes where they're digging through the rock. They cared that much about detail, they went far underground to get all the details right. I find that really cool. And on the topic of the crew, Atlantis used more CGI than any hand-drawn Disney movie ever made at the time. Mainly for the machines like the Leviathan and the other vehicles in the movie to give them much more of a sharp, mechanical kind of feel than the more fluid human characters in the movie. And the wide-angle shots, like the shot of the USS Ulysses traveling through the ocean, was mainly used for that, to give more detail on the 3D design. You couldn't really get something like that in hand-drawn animation. At least not without it costing a whole lot of money. CGI was mainly used to accentuate the artificial feeling of the machines and the buildings, and give more realistic detail to things like the city of Atlantis itself, and more of a sense of danger, like that cave-in scene, and the battle against Rourke and the rest of the mercenaries. By today's standards, it wouldn't be a big deal, especially since mainly CGI films are what Disney makes these days. But back in 2001, that was awesome. They even had 250 different animators, technicians, and artists working on the film at the peak of its production, utilizing all 3 Disney animation studios. That's a big deal. The visual style of the artwork is even based off of famed comic book artist Mike Mignola, artist of Hellboy. I'm not a fan of Hellboy, but I can see the resemblance between them with the sharp edges to some of the characters and whatnot. Joss Whedon, the creator of Firefly, was even involved with writing the movie. And if you look at some of my music playlists, you'll see I love Firefly music. Or Firefly in general. I should probably make a movie about that sometime soon, too. Also, for anyone who says that Elsa was the first Disney princess to become a queen, think again. Because Kidakagash Nadaka, or Kida, as she's called for short, was the first. It was never actually stated in dialogue, but at the end of the movie it's pretty obvious she now rules Atlantis since her father was the king. Also, she's pretty tough, which I really like in female characters. You can see this later in the movie when she bites this giant lobster thing to keep it from clawing Milo, and later when she flips a soldier over her head and fights off several others single-handedly before a knife gets shot out of her hand. I like that in Disney characters. She's also the first Disney princess to have a full name. Kind of funny it took 50 years for that to happen. Anyway, there's also some cool facts about the characters, too. For instance, Vincenzo Santorini, or Vinny, the main explosives expert, his last name is actually the name of a chain of volcanic islands in the Mediterranean, which really fits his penchant for explosives in the movie. It's kind of clever. Also, according to the Disney Adventures magazine, Cookie, the chef, was a Civil War veteran who could feed hundreds of people on almost no supplies. His voice actor Jim Varney actually died from lung cancer during production, and some of his lines had to be played by a stand-in. I recommend any fans of the movie to look up this issue, listed as Summer 2001, as it contains so much information that makes the characters feel so much more fleshed out. Such as Audrey, one of my favorite characters of the crew, who apparently invented new steering, cooling, and gear work for cars at Ford. Or Moliere, who apparently lived in the sewers of Paris as a kid. This also answers Sweet's line in the movie where Milo asks about Mole's backstory and Sweet just says, "Trust me on this, you don't want to know." Also, it contains a pretty realistic and subtle kind of villain, it's a spoiler alert, in Lyle Tiberius Rourke, who seems to have swiped a page of the Shepherd's Journal, and who turns out to have swiped a page of the Shepherd's Journal, was in it to steal the heart of Atlantis and sell it to a foreign country for $2 billion, since he doesn't believe in the life-giving properties of the crystal, and believes it's just a giant diamond. At first, he comes off as polite and disciplined, if a little stern and short-tempered at times, but I noticed there's this subtle bit in the movie where he's introduced. He mentions he had read the Shepherd's Journal himself and says, "Nice pictures. I prefer a good Western myself." This directly ties into his motivations, which mirror some of the early settlers who came to the Americas in search of gold, which is a conquista. He even had this Machiavellian attitude towards the indigenous population of Atlantis, not caring that stealing the crystal would be like committing genocide by removing the Atlanteans' life force. His main motivation is money and fame, directly contrasting Milo's motivation of just proving Atlantis exists without caring about any of the financial aspects of the discovery or fame or anything like that. In the beginning, Mike Rourke even says that he thinks the journey will be an enriching experience for all of us. Another subtle reference to his ultimate goal. Now that I look back on it, he was probably one of the more realistic Disney villains. Nice job there. And that brings us to the main character, Milo Thatch. I think he gets left behind in terms of Disney heroes, which is a real shame. He's obviously very smart, apparently having graduated high school at age 11, according to the aforementioned Disney magazine. He's also not the type of muscle-bound warrior or orphan like Hero or Jim Hawkins that Disney usually focuses on. Although his parents are mentioned to have died, and his grandfather, who he used to live with, has apparently also died too. But that's not the main focus of his character, unlike some other characters like that. He's mostly a skinny nerd who has a driving force to discover Atlantis, to prove his grandfather's theory that Atlantis exists. His interest in ancient cultures is actually personally relatable to me. And I can even see some of my good friend Spencer Griffin in him, particularly the interest in languages and his cat and his pet cat Fluffy. Also, Atlantis is a great example of steampunk films, one of my favorite sci-fi genres. It's set in 1914, so it's kind of late steampunk era, early diesel punk era, as seen when Milo mentions the modern internal combustion engine in the beginning of the movie. Sure, they have the somewhat unrealistic machines like the Ulysses, the Digger, but they also, and a couple of others like that, but they also have some more historically accurate trucks, aircraft, and even that little chuck wagon that Gertie had that was pulled by a treaded tractor called Gertie. I think something like that could actually have been built in that time period. But it's hard to say. Even the guns and things the crew uses are even pretty realistic for the time period. It includes stuff like the broom-handle Mauser, the Lee Enfield rifle, and even an old Lewis gun. The authenticity is mainly due to the director, Kirk Wise. He wanted as much accuracy as possible, both in the realistic and fictional areas of the movie, and got as many people on hand as possible to get that done right. I think I might say, this film was even shot in 70mm format to give it that feel of old adventure films like Indiana Jones, since the filmmakers wanted to give it that nostalgic feeling of films presented in CinemaScope format. If you watch the two movies side by side, I'm pretty sure you can see the resemblance between the two. And I think that adds a little more detail to what is already one of my favorite Disney movies. And that is why I think Atlantis the Lost Empire is just so cool and unique for what it is. I personally wish Disney would make more cool, creative stories like this rather than churning out the live-action remake junk they keep making in droves these days. To anyone who hasn't seen this movie, I recommend you at least watch it. If you don't go for the movie as much as other Disney films, that's fine, but I hope you know why I like it so much. This is the Lord of Randomness, signing off.